139 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. To all members, please wait until I recognize you by name. Before speaking, I would also like to remind everyone that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Thank you all for your cooperation. We are doing the study Hate-Motivated Violence Targeting the 2S LGBTQI plus community pursuant to Standing Order 108, Section 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. The committee will resume its study of hate-motivated violence targeting the 2S LGBTQI plus community. Trigger warning. Before we welcome witnesses, I would like to provide this trigger warning. We'll be discussing experiences related to hate-motivated violence. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If any participants feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. For all witnesses and for members of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions. So let's try to be compassionate in our conversations. I would like to welcome our witnesses. I will start Mr. Tyler Weisner. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I'm a gay 26-year-old paralegal with the Department of Justice Canada, although I do not speak on behalf of the Government of Canada in any way. First, I want to thank the Standing Committee on the Status of Women for allowing me this opportunity to speak about my community. While I am not trans and I cannot speak on behalf of all queer youth, I have supported queer youth in one way or another over the past 10 years. And I'd like to give a glimpse into the bullying they face, the exclusion they experience, the role disinformation plays, but I'll also focus on the joy and necessity of a community that strives for understanding. This kind of community encourages cooperation, respect, and I believe increases a sense of safety and strongly reduces the likelihood of violence. I'll begin back when I was in high school. I started a Gender and Sexuality Alliance, both to discuss queer issues, but also to create space for my Catholic high school's queer community. I knew of countless bullying incidents and overheard how people spoke negatively about trans youth in general. I saw firsthand how this group changed the lives of gay and trans youth, including myself. The act of simply having space for queer youth to be themselves without having to mask who they are, while engaging with their peers and adults who either understand or who strive to understand, I believe is paramount to the success of queer youth. In 2015, when then Premier Kathleen Wynne introduced a new sex ed curriculum, this new curriculum became incredibly controversial in Oakville, Ontario. One school board meeting comes to mind when a strong disinformation campaign convinced many that the new curriculum was something very different from reality. This disinformation resulted in dozens of protesters filled with hate surrounding this school board meeting, resulting in the police being called. Since 2021, I have worked as a camp counselor for the 15 to 17-year-old group with Camp 10 Oaks, which is a summer camp in Ontario for youth from 2S LGBTQ+ identities, families, and communities. The camp sessions provide a safe place for campers from across North America to engage with peers of similar experience and to learn from the passionate team of queer role models who also come from a variety of lived experiences. The executive director of the 10 Oaks Project, Kimani Montgomery, is here with us today. Through deeply introspective conversations, real-life debates, and their drive for a bright future, these groups of campers have opened my eyes to the common struggles that queer youth, especially trans youth, face today. While I can think of many examples, one conversation with a camper has stuck with me. An older camper pulled me aside and articulately and passionately expressed that they had been significantly struggling with coming out over the past few years, and that Camp 10 Oaks specifically gave them the confidence to come out and be exactly who they are. And I was lucky enough to see that change in them. Queer and trans youth do not deserve the social exclusion, emotional manipulation, distrust, transphobic and sexist rhetoric facilitated through social media echo chambers, and violence that some experience. I know that places like Camp 10 Oaks are valuable and necessary, like my high school Gender and Sexuality Alliance, due to the joy and courage spaces like it produce. In preparing for today's panel, I heard one common theme amongst my trans friends and colleagues, that queer spaces like Camp 10 Oaks were necessary for their own security and development. I hope for a future where queer youth can find a welcoming and nurturing community all around them, although, of course, this will not happen overnight. Given my experience with queer youth, while facilitating safe spaces for queer youth to be themselves and addressing disinformation through social media echo chambers or otherwise is important in combating exclusion, bullying, hate, and violence. Although listening to the realities faced by trans people, especially trans people of color, will absolutely contribute to a safer and more cohesive Canadian society. Finally, learning is not just the responsibility of cisgender, heterosexual people or straight people, but also queer people to learn about those among their own community. Each and every one of us are human. We all feel happiness, fear, hurt, and I truly believe that striving to understand rather than to tolerate or to accept is essential for queer youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weisner. Next, Ms. Breer and Madam Baker. Reservez la parole pour...
You now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Your mic between nose and mouth, a little bit up. Yes, thank you.
Bonjour à tous les parlementaires.
Good morning to all members of Parliament and partners. Thank you for having us before you today. I'd just like to introduce myself. I am the Executive Director of Fondation Emergence, and I'm accompanied by Olivia, trainer and content specialist. Fondation Emergence is a non-profit organization dedicated to informing, educating, and raising awareness among the general public about LGBTQ+ realities. Our expertise lies in training services, corporate coaching, and the production of awareness-raising tools. In addition to trying to make workplaces, seniors, and caregivers more inclusive, we also take action against conversion therapy and cyberbullying. As well, every year, we organize an awareness campaign for May 17th, the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. And we started this in 2003. In 2024, we chose as our theme the rise of hatred toward LGBTQ+ people. And this choice was informed by the trends we've noticed, such as statistics on the increase in hate crimes, online hate and misinformation on the rise, reports from our corporate partners on a significant increase in hate messages when they draft publications related to sexual and gender diversity, anti-LGBTQ+ demonstrations, and acts of vandalism, but also the attitude and comments of certain people in our training courses who share opinions based on misinformation, such as the litterbox hoax, or demonstrate a certain amount of hostility towards the subject at hand. Today, we'd like to share 2 thoughts on the subject with you. Our first point is illustrated in our campaign slogan. When the rights of LGBTQ+ people go backwards, the whole of society goes backwards. This rise in hatred And the backwards trend of LGBTQ plus rights should not be seen in isolation, but rather as a symptom of a more general trend that is worrying for society as a whole. It's often said that LGBTQ plus communities only represent a minority of the population, and this is true. The number of just over 1/10 of the population is generally quoted. However, anti-LGBTQ plus violence can also affect other sectors of the population. For example, people who are perceived as LGBTQ plus, for example, a young boy who is seen as effeminate and is bullied at school, or a cisgender woman who is seen as too masculine and experiences transphobia. Other examples would include families and friends of LGBTQ plus people, for example, children of same-sex couples. Note that according to our Léger Marketing survey conducted in 2024, 45% of people in Canada have LGBTQ plus loved ones. And of course, there are all the other marginalized communities, because LGBTQ phobias open the door to other types of violence and can set dangerous precedents. Our second point is that this violence doesn't just come from nowhere. It can be seen as a pendulum swinging back after a remarkable advance in LGBTQ plus rights in recent decades. Indeed, a spike in violence often follows major advances in human rights, and I can't help but think of the Polytechnique massacre of December 6th, or the growth of the masculinist movement, which exemplifies so well the backlash that feminist struggles are experiencing. Anti-LGBTQ plus violence is also the result of anti-LGBTQ plus discourse. And in this regard, I'd like to share with you this concept of dangerous discourse. Dangerous speech is defined by the Dangerous Speech Project as being any form of expression, for example, speech or images, that increases the risk that its audience will condone or commit violence against members of another group. And there are several elements that help identify dangerous speech. For example, rhetorical elements often found in anti-LGBTQ plus speech, such as dehumanization, or presenting the targeted group as a threat to the group's integrity or purity. Take, for example, the idea that LGBTQ plus people recruit or confuse young people, accusing this group of attacking women and girls, for example, accusations of grooming and fears that trans women will attack cis women. The group Dangerous Speech Project has also produced a document on the use of dangerous anti-trans speech in the 2024 U.S. elections. As we know, So as we know, there has been an increase in hate speech in Canada, and over 34% of Canadians believe that hate speech against LGBTQ plus people has increased in Canada over the past 3 years. In terms of solutions, one of the solutions we'd like to put forward in line with the recommendation of the Dangerous Speech Project is awareness raising in reaction, but also in prevention of hate and misinformation, because it's easier to provide information than to undo misinformation. Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Lauren Pragg. Lauren Pragg, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, the committee, and my fellow witnesses. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and I would like to thank the committee for undertaking this important study. My name is Lauren Pragg, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Executive Director of LGBT Youthline. Youthline is a youth-led, anti-racist organization dedicated to supporting 2S LGBTQ plus youth 29 and under across Ontario through peer support, resources, comprehensive training, advocacy, and referrals. Youthline began in 1993 as a community-based solution to offer support to 2S LGBTQ plus young people who needed someone to talk to who understood what they were going through. Even 30 years ago, our founders recognized the need for support outside of major cities, so we aim to have a presence in rural, remote, and underserved communities across Ontario and at times Canada, ensuring that even in regions where services are scarce, youth have one place to turn to for support. At Youthline, we're on the front line 6 days a week, connecting with approximately 3,000 queer and trans youth every year. Through our helpline, our peer support volunteers provide support for youth navigating the real and pressing challenges they face, including discrimination and marginalization in their schools, families, and healthcare systems. These conversations offer sobering views of how policies and inaction directly contribute to the barriers and harmful experiences shaping young queer lives. At Youthline, we do this work while also living its impact with staff and volunteers who are themselves 2S LGBTQ plus youth and adults, working tirelessly to create safe and affirming spaces. Our experience tells us that youth know who they are and have a strong sense of how they might identify. However, what we're seeing, especially with the rise of the parental rights discourse, is that young people must negotiate whether school is a safe place for them to be themselves when home may already be unsafe for them. When service users ask if schools will out them to their families, we can't provide a definitive answer or reassurance to them because of the vast differences in not just policy, but also in the application of policy and enforcement. The truth is that there's always a risk of being outed, regardless of policy. For our service users, this means we cannot tell them that they will not be in danger if they choose to come out. Even in school boards that are inclusive on paper, safe school policies are not being enforced. Queer and trans students are dealing with daily homophobia, transphobia, and harassment from their peers and sometimes the adults in their school. One service user told us, "I'm constantly just being given dirty looks or harassed in the locker rooms and bathrooms. My friends and I always get comments at lunch or straight up get called slurs. Me and another student told the principal about them, but she hasn't talked to them." We've also heard about harassment from school staff. Another chatter told us one such figure saying, "She'll come into my other classes and out me to everyone. It feels like she misgenders me on purpose. I feel like such a failure and want to cry. I told my vice principal, but it still hasn't stopped." We also have service users whose parents have been radicalized by the far right and espouse opinions echoing popular figures such as Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Jordan Peterson. We get service users whose parents are against the so-called left agenda and think schools are transing kids, but for these youth, school is actually the only safe place they have to be themselves. Anti-2S LGBTQ plus violence also impacts students who aren't out. Since the lockdowns have ended, we've noticed that young people are having trouble making and keeping friends, and a lot of our chatters feel like their options are to put up with homophobic friends or to be alone. Beyond schools, protests like the 1 Million March for Children and the rise of transphobia in general has trans people worried about their safety at minimum, and at worst has some of our community members feeling hopeless about being queer or trans entirely. Youth have also expressed the intense hatred that's facing them externally as being turned inward on themselves. November was our busiest month of this year, and specifically the day after the US election was one of our busiest days of the year. Of the service users who shared their gender, all were either trans, questioning, or cis women. Of those who shared their age, all of them were 18 or under. In 1 week's time, half of the chats that mentioned the election explicitly named being worried about trans rights or anti-trans legislation. On the night after the election, half the chats that mentioned the election were from chatters from other provinces worried about the influence the US election will have on their own rights. Some of those chats have come from provinces that have stripped trans youth of their rights, such as Alberta, with chatters expressing absolute desperation. One chatter felt that they were forced to leave their province because they felt so unsafe and that they felt there would never be a place for them. Youthline's recent advocacy campaign, Right for Student Rights, focused on school safety and inclusion for 2S LGBTQ plus youth in Ontario. The campaign was developed in response to anti-trans legislation in other provinces and the recent nationwide anti-trans protests. The campaign was also motivated by comments to the media from Premier Doug
you
Ford.
have just 30 seconds. Please wrap it over.
Thank you. Comments to the media from Premier Doug Ford and the former Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, in the fall of 2022 that suggested they agreed with the policy changes in other provinces, which brings us back to the ongoing discussion that's been happening in this committee about the use of the notwithstanding clause. The last thing I will leave you with right now is that I want to be clear that queer and trans people are everywhere. We're your neighbors, friends, family members, and community. No social or political issue remains separate from our communities and our very real concerns about transphobia and homophobia. Not Indigenous sovereignty here or abroad, not poverty, not education, not housing, not climate crisis, and not healthcare. And I hope the committee keeps that reality in mind as you complete this important and meaningful study. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have for me. And once again, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bragg. Next, we move to Mr. Tyler Boyce. You have floor for 5 minutes.
Good morning, members of the committee and the Enchanté member organizations who have already provided testimony today. My name is Tyler Boyce, and I'm the Executive Director of the Enchanté Network, Canada's national association for 2S LGBTQI+ organizations. I'm also a proud Black gay man. Today, I'm here to share the real-life stories and challenges facing hundreds of queer and trans organizations across this country. Let me start with an uncomfortable truth. The organizations the Enchanté Network supports should not have to exist. Their existence is a direct result of the gaps in government systems that have left 2S LGBTQI+ Canadians without access to healthcare, housing, and basic safety. Yet, these organizations step in to provide life-saving services from suicide prevention to mental health supports, despite being underfunded, undervalued, and now increasingly unsafe. Anti-gender hate has created a chilling effect across the 2S LGBTQI+ sector, threatening the very existence of those vital spaces. This chilling effect is not abstract. Last summer, a queer organization in North Bay, Ontario called me. Their executive director, a trans man, had opened an email in the morning with threats against his life. Anti-gender extremists told him that they were going to put him through a wood chipper. Just months later, I spoke with a mother in Vancouver, and she shared how she stopped attending the local parent support group for trans youth in her community because she feared being followed home. She described taking winding routes home, back from meetings, worried that anti-gender extremists might harm her simply for seeking the support that she needed as a parent. And earlier this year, a cyber attack on Transcare Plus in Ontario forced them to halt services and divert their already scarce resources to cybersecurity efforts rather than providing their life-saving care to trans youth. These stories are just a few examples of how hate is not only targeting individuals, but destabilizing the very organizations working to keep Canadians safe. Meanwhile, the resources to address this crisis are grossly insufficient. Canada's National Action Plan to Combat Hate allocates 5.5% of its $273.6 million to 2S LGBTQI+ organizations. That's barely a fraction of what we need. When will our elected officials finally meet us with the resources necessary for us to meet this moment? The Enchanté Network's very own Rainbow Resilience Fund received over $1.6 million in requests from queer organizations in less than 3 weeks. However, we only had $500,000 to distribute due to limited government support. For every organization that we helped, 3 more were left vulnerable to threats of violence. If something happens to these organizations that are left unsupported, the responsibility will lie squarely with our elected officials who failed to act decisively to prevent it. Fortunately, this committee does have the power to act, and I urge you to recommend 3 things. 1, new and expanded funding to ensure 2S LGBTQI+ organizations can continue to offer life-saving supports. 2, renewed Rainbow Resilience Fund support to address urgent safety needs. And 3, improved systems for reporting hate crimes so law enforcement and community safety alternatives can be best equipped to support our communities. These are not luxuries, they are necessities, and the cost of inaction is devastating. When organizations like Out Loud North Bay or Transcare Plus face overwhelming threats of hate, it reflects the broader danger of anti-gender hate. 2S LGBTQI+ organizations are doing their part, often at a great personal and financial cost. And it's time for government to step up and do their part as well. Members of this committee, we have a choice: to continue underfunding and overlooking the organizations who are quite literally saving lives, or to act decisively to protect these spaces and the people who rely on them. The future does not have to be defined by this chilling effect. There is a Canada where queer and trans Canadians can thrive. where hate is no longer tolerated, and where every person, regardless of who they are, has the chance to live a safe, full, and dignified life. But we can only get there if you act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce. Thank you all for your opening remarks. Now we will move to our rounds of questions. We'll start from Ms. Ferrari. You have 6 minutes. Michelle.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Morning, everyone. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. If I could, I'd like to start with Mr. Laurent, I believe. You had said you'd referenced your stats, and I was wondering if you have any that you could share with the committee on your stats that you've seen in hate crimes impacting your clientele.
Oui, vous me permettez de répondre en français?
Yes, I'll respond in French. Go ahead. Yes, our foundation, just give me one moment. So our foundation has surveys each year to look into the opinions and perceptions of Canadians regarding the LGBTQ plus perceptions. And our surveys are available on our website. We have about 1,500 respondents throughout Canada who fill in the Léger marketing survey. And in response to your question, about 78% of Canadians say that they are allies with the LGBTQ plus community. So in terms of hate crimes, we use data provided by police services. These are public data, and this is data about the rise in hate crimes. So in 2018 and 2022, there was about a tripling or quadrupling of hate crimes against the LGBT plus community. So we always use official data. I don't know if that answers your question. Perhaps Olivia can add to that. Thank you very much.
Witnesses come forward and share some powerful testimony. And I think one of the things that I've seen in my own community is where people who are violating parole, violating bail, are out committing crimes. So the public safety is at risk for a lot of people who feel more vulnerable or who are more vulnerable. And I guess where I would ask that in everybody, in all the witnesses, I have a lot of friends who, they just don't feel safe walking down the street anymore. They just don't feel that public safety has been a priority based on the bail and justice system, where people are sort of out free like violent repeat offenders. Has this been an issue within your communities that you serve? And anyone is free to answer that question. I have Mr. Weisner and Mr. Boyce in the room, but anybody is free to answer that.
If I can, je vais juste rajouter quelque chose sur. Je pense qu'on
just have something to add. We've been talking about hate crimes and violence, and I think it's important to add that even though there is a striking rise, that is, say, of about 72% over the years, I think we also have to think about all the crimes that aren't reported, aren't documented. To give you an idea, 91% of members of the LGBTQ plus community who have suffered from crimes dealing with or that have to do with their identity did not report these events. So one has to keep in mind that that's only the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing.
I think one of the things we've seen in sort of our studies on intimate partner violence as well, right, we've heard from witness testimony, is that when there are no consequences, there's nothing stopping, hateful people or bad people or criminals from doing these things again. And so I think you're exactly correct that, I don't even know that all of these things are reported, especially when we look at intimate partner violence or domestic violence or because there's an element of shame as well for a lot of folks too. So, Mr. Boyce, you said you had looked like you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I really appreciate the question. I do want to bring this committee back in focus, though, to the point that it's not only violent criminals or repeat offenders who are committing these crimes against queer and trans communities, but rather we're living in a heightened moment where folks with no record, everyday Canadians, are being radicalized into an anti-gender movement for a myriad of different reasons. But I really do want to bring it back into focus that it's not only folks that are repeat offenders that are committing these crimes, but rather that there are folks who are being radicalized.
That's fair.
And that's
so
why
are
these
those folks
conversations
getting
are so
charged?
important.
Are the folks that are doing those radical movements that you're saying, those crimes, are you feeling justice is being served for the people, whether they're repeat violent offenders or they're first-time offenders or they're hate crimes? Do you find that there's justice being served for the victims?
While it's very important to think about justice, I think that there are many ways to think about it. One is the approach that I think I'm hearing in your question, which is a punitive approach towards justice. I think there are other ways to approach justice, and that's why conversations like this, listening to witnesses that are providing real-life testimony, allow us to understand how broader narratives around the pathologization of queer and trans people, some that have been echoed in the House of Commons itself, have consequences. It's not only about the punishments, but about us all acting responsibly with our words to prevent crimes.
If I may, Mr. Boyce,
Chair,
would you
to
like...
prevent crimes from happening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm all out of time? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So next we move to Mrs. Saray. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here and for your testimony. I'm going to start my question for Lauren Prague. So thank you for working with the Youth Line. Very, very important. I just have a quick question. You mentioned the line is available 6 days a week. What are the hours and where do you get your funding? So just quickly on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. The hours are 4 to 9:30, 6 days a week, so we're not open on Saturdays and every other day. And our funding comes from a mix of sometimes government, corporate grants money, and then a lot of great community support from individuals.
Okay, thank you, and we definitely need to look at that 24/7. There's no doubt. Also, my second question, you mentioned about parental rights, the whole discourse that's happening right now, and I wanted to get your thoughts, because obviously in the schools, you know, when we look at the 2S LGBTQI plus in the schools, there was a safe place. Now youth are feeling this may not be a safe place. So I got two questions for you. What would you want to tell parents today that are listening? And second, where do youth go as a safe place now if the school is not safe? Thank
you. Those are both great questions. I'll start with your second one first. And so in terms of where do youth go, that's a great question. I think like I said, sometimes youth are having to make exceptions and stay in friend groups, different kinds of relationships that don't feel supportive of them. And so their options are limited. I do also think that our communities do turn online a lot of the time. And so that's a really important place for our communities. But there's also, as we all know, a lot of mis and disinformation happening online. Social media algorithms contribute to a lot of dangerous trends and can really impact mental health. So it's not a pretty picture, I guess I would say. And so more funding, more spaces are needed. The spaces that exist need the kind of training so that they can be more supportive, welcoming, inclusive. In terms of what I want to say to parents, there's a lot that I want to say. But I think for now, what I will say is, you know, I can understand parents feeling afraid. I can understand parents feeling confused, you know, and I think what I've seen in previous conversations at this committee is that what we want to do is open a dialogue, right? This is about helping people to understand. And so I think when things are presented in an extreme way with very little facts and information, it can feel very different, new, scary for parents. But I think giving your children the opportunity to speak for themselves, offering understanding and empathy, and also being open to learning yourself, right? But these are still the same children and young people that you've always known that have been in your life, and they need the support to say who they are, speak up, and be themselves. Without that room, very dangerous things can happen, as we've seen, right? Without a supportive home space, there's higher numbers of homelessness, substance use, abusive relationships, all kinds of things, because people are looking for a place to go, right? And as I mentioned earlier, there aren't very many options. And so I would ask parents to come to the table with an open mind and some empathy. And, hopefully myself and other organizations that do this kind of work, we can help with some of that information. We can
Thank
help
you,
create
Lauren.
dialogue.
Thank you. Just a limited time. Tyler Boyce, thank you for mentioning in your testimony, obviously, North Bay, the issue there. My nephew, my godchild, Je ne sais pas, lives in West Nipissing, right beside North Bay, and is feeling some of those threats, and when we look at queer youth, and he's a drag queen, so that adds, very proud of him, but I wanted to ask you, when we look at, you mentioned about the radicalization, the online, do you have any recommendations for us when we're looking at the algorithms of social media, the bots? What would you recommend the federal government do? Because these companies like Elon Musk and Twitter, the cesspool of hate, I call it, Twitter, how can we, what would you recommend us to do as a government in that space?
I think that it's really difficult because we have to weigh our civil liberties against what is right and keeping people safe online. I can share that what we've seen in our work is that when it is the wild, wild west online and there are no guardrails for the safety of queer and trans folks, that there are real-life consequences to that hate. I brought up in my testimony how folks are being radicalized into extremist anti-gender movements, and a lot of that is happening online. We know that about a third of Gen Z identifies as part of the 2S LGBTQI+ community. We also know that this generation, the future leaders of tomorrow, are spending a lot of their youth online. And so I'd recommend to this government that in doing that balancing act between, of course, our online civil liberties, but also preventing online hate crimes and their real-life consequences, we consider the real-life experiences of queer and trans folks who are being impacted by the internet, and that there is a role for government to play in that conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Soray. Next, we move to Madame Larouche. You have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank our 5 witnesses for being with us today for this study that is taking place in a rather uncertain and troubling environment. The statistics are striking. And there's an increase in hate, and we've seen a rise in femicides. And we've seen actually the connection as well between these hate crimes. Now, I'd like to start with Laurent Brault. Thank you for coming today. And Ms. Olivia Baker, when you were speaking, you referenced the Dangerous Speech Project. Could you, in 1 minute or two, because you had to wrap up quite quickly, could you, in a couple of minutes, just expand a little bit on that and perhaps talk about what you didn't have time to point out in your opening remarks? Well, thank you. I don't necessarily have much more to add, but what I would add is this. I think the concept of dangerous speech is very interesting, not just hateful speech, because it refers to the rhetoric that's used. And oftentimes, this kind of speech can be found on social networks. My colleague referred to the Wild West on social media, and that's true. But sometimes, actually, this happens in other kinds of venues. For example, reports, articles, various types of communication that are biased, actually, and that contain a bias. And these also can be dangerous. For example, some people may say, oh, I read in the newspaper such and such a thing, but it may not be based on fact. And it's very difficult then when it's part of for example, an article of a newspaper report, for example. It's very hard then to undo that kind of misinformation when it's that rather than just a Facebook post. Thank you. There are other witnesses who drew a line between this hate speech and the American elections. Can you comment on that? Yes. Perhaps I can comment. I've just come back from Geneva, where I met with the Canadian UN mission, and there are red lights everywhere in terms of LGBTQ plus rights. There was a ruling of the Supreme Court in the States in favor of a right-wing movement. And what this means is that LGBTQ plus community members may become an easier target. And what's happening in the United States can end up over the years filtering into countries like our own. So currently, it's a very complicated and complex debate in the United States, and that differs between the states themselves. If you look at the map, you can see where rights are being rolled back, and those are states where there were already very few protections in place for the LGBTQ plus community, and now those rights are being rolled back even further. And this is a global phenomenon, and we can feel it making its way here. That's very interesting. So I'm just going to continue with you, Laurent. Another subject that you raised in your opening remarks was the issue of conversion therapy. Now, I know that this is something that you care about deeply. And legislation was passed here. I believe you even held a symposium on the issue of conversion therapy. So could you tell us a little about what you've seen? Because in terms of the legislation, what we've seen is that it's still very easy to get around it, especially when you're talking about, for example, religious groups. Can you speak to that? Thank you for bringing that up. We are very proud that Canada is one of the 11 countries that has forbidden conversion therapy. What we're seeing on the ground is this. Very few are aware of the issue of conversion therapy, whether it has to do with law enforcement, whether it has to do with school boards. And there's a lot of confusion even within the population at large regarding conversion therapy. Some people think that this is a type of affirmation therapy. So what we have to do then is raise awareness about conversion therapy. So it's not just because it's been forbidden that there's no more work to be done. There are several issues here. Conversion therapy, or therapies rather, have changed somewhat, so they're less easy to detect. Now, there's for example, take the Metro newspaper that doesn't exist anymore. They were able, or they reported on people who were able to obtain conversion therapy through churches in Montreal. And there's also the issue of telemedicine. And therapy, actually, is also shifting its way of being communicated online, for example, virtually. So this is an issue. And to wrap up on this point, support is required to find the victims. Allow me to explain. The nature of conversion therapy means that victims are often kind of not held captive, but surrounded by members, their family members, for example, and they're afraid of actually being reported to their other family members, and they're afraid of reporting themselves what's happening.
Ms. Gazan? Ms. Gazan, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and so sorry that I can't be with all of you in person today. And I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I want to talk about the radicalization of the far right, in particular, Jordan Peterson. I've heard he's moved to the States, good riddance to bad rubbish, who supports things like the 1 Million March. But what is concerning about Jordan Peterson is that the conservative leader actively fraternizes with him and supports him. And why I'm concerned about this, and I try and stay as nonpartisan as possible in committee, is that I worry, as one of the witnesses spoke about, another polytechnique, but against the 2S LGBTQIA plus community in Canada. I believe you mentioned that, Olivia Baker, and I'll give you some examples. The current leader, Pierre Poilievre, appeared on a show with Jordan Peterson on his YouTube channel, May 16th, 2022, in the name of freedom, talking about freedom. Jordan Peterson wrote an article, in fact, February 29th, 2024, very recently. I am Jordan Peterson. It says, Jordan Peterson, the awe-inspiring conservative counteroffensive against woke nonsense, something that we have to hear about, woke nonsense, like gender-affirming care is now woke nonsense, like the rights of 2S LGBTQIA+, having the right to access safe bathrooms is now woke nonsense. And that was written in the National Post. That's a couple of examples. And we know that there has been an increase of far-right nonsense since the pandemic. One of the things I said recently in a national documentary is that I think people are really struggling with mental health, and these far-right movements are usurping people into these anti-gender movements that have the potential for violence. So I want to start with you, Lauren Prague. Why is it dangerous? Why does it put the 2S LGBTQIA plus community in danger by having political leaders fraternize with people who spew hate speech?
Thank you so much for the question. I mean, I think the bottom line is that it legitimizes these positions, right? And so for folks trying to make an informed political decision, it seems as though that those are viable options. Those are real legitimate claims. I would suggest, Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger, really laid out a lot in terms of how the pandemic really contributed to mis and disinformation and the kind of radicalization that it led to. And the other thing I will say is, like, some of these campaigns are really about scapegoating, right? And so we know that. We see that it's come up again in this committee already. And so I think we need to get a bit deeper in terms of asking, like, what is the purpose? What are far right figures trying to scapegoat our community for? It's for division, it's for control, it's for increased limits to freedom, even though they speak largely about freedom. And so I think that is the risk.
I totally agree. I mean, it's like freedom for some and not for others. And I've said that many times before. I wanted to move to you, Olivia Baker. You spoke about polytechnique, and it sent shivers down my spine. One of the reasons why I supported this study, and you said that you were trying to define dangerous speech, because it seems like anything, a freedom speech is called woke. But let's talk about dangerous speech, because I think what's happening, like even with petitions against being brought by conservatives members against women and girls, talking about an attack on the safety of women and girls, to have, gender affirming bathrooms or having trans women going to bathrooms. I would say that's dangerous speech because it's not based on fact. But dangerous speech said any form of speech that will condone or encourage violence against the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. It's aimed to recruit and attack, and you specifically used bathrooms. How is the current rhetoric? Because I take my role as a member of parliament seriously. I know that what I say has impact and that it can either be good or harmful. How is the current political discourse? Discourse emboldening far-right extremism and putting the 2S LGBTQIA plus community at risk?
Deux choses là-dessus. Première chose, j'ai mentionné Polytechnique, mais j'aurais aussi...
Well, 2 points. I mentioned the Polytechnique, but I could also have mentioned Waterloo University, where an individual stabbed a professor who was teaching gender theory. And as a trainer, clearly, we've asked ourselves if we're in danger when we provide training. Am I the next one who's going to end up being stabbed because I'm talking about gender theory in quotation marks? So what's interesting about dangerous speech is that that term was created after considering the type of speech that was circulating when talking about war, genocide, etc. We were wondering, the question was, how does this end up happening? How does hate speech start developing so that people start thinking that they're coming for our kids? If parents feel that their children's safety is at risk, then of course they're going to be much freer with their own use of violence or speech. And you find images in bathrooms of dangerous, for example, trans people, and you find images and speech against them.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay.
So we are starting next round. Next round, we start with Mr. Roberts. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I'm going to start with asking if anyone's heard of Bill C-412. No. Okay, so Bill C-412 is a bill. It's a better alternative to Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. It will keep Canadians safe online without infringing on their civil liberties. The Online Harms Act creates a costly censorship bureaucracy, which the PBO has estimated at $200 million, arguably the most expensive in the world. C-412 gives Canadians more protection online through existing regulators and the justice system. And the reason I ask that is I understand free speech and I get it, but I'm getting from all the witnesses that we're not holding people accountable. And I feel it's important that if you commit a crime, then you should be held accountable. If we don't stop the perpetrators from hurting people, like it was said earlier, I believe, by Ms. Baker, that 91% of the 2SLGBTQ1+ do not report. So how can we make this a better world if we don't hold these individuals to account? So I'll start with you, Mr. Bryce.
Mr. Boyce?
Boyce, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I really appreciate the question. I think that there are, and maybe I'll be more specific than I was earlier. I do agree that justice must be part of this conversation, but I don't want the sole focus of this conversation to be on punitive approaches to justice. I think that another alternative to justice is taking the path of deterrence. Right now, there is a public education imperative that is necessary in this country. Maybe general Canadians understand what it is to be gay or what it is to be bisexual or a lesbian, But in this committee, I think the focus has been squarely put on gender, and that means trans and non-binary communities. I don't think that we should maybe jump the gun to not giving Canadians the chance to be publicly and properly educated on the realities that trans people face, to bring Canadians into the conversation before we jump to the punitive approach. There are many deterrent ways that we can have that conversation, and just to close, I think that education has to be a first step.
One of the reasons that I asked this question is in my previous life, a customer of mine who was gay could not speak about it at home due to the culture beliefs, and therefore always was very cautious because of the fear the repercussions even from home. So how do we educate individuals? You talk about education. How do we educate individuals that are coming to Canada that this is acceptable in Canada and we need to embrace it and not make people feel insulted or harm, that they're going to, effectively have harm come to them? How do we do that?
That is such a great way of thinking about it, and I think that we share the approach of empathy and compassion. I'll equally share a story. So I also volunteer at old folks' homes, just to meet new people, have different ideas from a different generation. So many times when I tell folks from that generation about my sexual orientation, the conversation shifts. But in those moments, I have developed so much hope and belief in the good spirit of Canadians to be brought into conversations of broader equality and justice. So many times those conversations could have said to me, this person is a bad person because they don't understand my sexual orientation or gender identity. But when I took the time to listen and give them the patience and grace to come with me along that journey, when they felt safe to ask questions about what it means to be trans or non-binary or gay, suddenly a new connection was built. And I share that example because that individual connection in my life could be the blueprint for how we approach Canadian society in general.
And because my time is limited, I actually volunteer at seniors' homes, and I will tell you, I enjoy it because they're very innocent, and I don't find that they judge people, but I find that they're at the time in their life where they're accepting, and that's really reassuring to me that we are able to understand that as we get older. I'm a senior, I'm not going to lie, and I'm damn proud of it because I'm on the right side of the soil. But what I do want to emphasize is that unless we ensure the safety of everyone, whether it's within their home or outside their home, there has to be penalties so that we can keep everyone safe. And that's what's concerning to me. I have family members that are gay, and I know the struggles they went through with their own families. And we need to change that. And when you talk about education...
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. You're way out of time.
I'm cut off?
Yeah. No, if quickly, 30-second short answer you want to give Ms. Roberts?
End of your question, but I will say that I do think that it's not a either-or conversation, and the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a continuum of justice, and I'm just saying that the first point in that continuum must be one where we meet Canadians with empathy, compassion, and the hope that they can be brought into a conversation. Maybe the last step is the punitive approach, but I'm, at this point in time, in 2024, really willing to lean into that public education as a first piece.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Emma, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to all of the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to move over to the other Tyler, if that's okay. Tyler, you and I met in 2015 after you had been to the school board. You mentioned the meetings at the time. And your teacher asked if I would have a coffee with you because you were so upset about what had happened. And I still remember because one of the mums of one of your best friends had not treated you well. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal experience being subjected to that level of hate?
And I'll expand a little bit more about that board meeting specifically. And thank you again, Pam, for inviting me here. It's an incredible opportunity. Yeah, so at this board meeting, actually my friend and colleague Joel was able to speak on my behalf about the social exclusion I experienced in elementary school, grades 6, 7, 8, which pushed me to miss about half of grade 8 simply because I felt so excluded, and that fear of bullying was so intense that even though I was very involved in school, loved learning, I hid in my bedroom. And I attended this board meeting with a youth group through the Positive Space Network. It was the Youth Action Committee. And my friend Joel, who was the trustee at the time, the student trustee, shared my story, which was incredibly emotional to hear, but very impactful, I believe, in this meeting. What resulted because of a mass disinformation campaign, which I have some articles about here, if I could mention, I'll mention later, did result in many protesters filled with hate, screaming every slur you could ever imagine at us, getting physically violent, which is why the police had to be called. And this kind of violence continues today. I received a death threat a month ago. These things happen to my colleagues all the time. I don't see it changing today, but as the other Tyler mentioned, I think that we are at a place where we need to come together and talk about this, that education really is the first step.
Well, Tyler, I just want to say how incredibly proud I am, not only today, but I was of you in 2015 when you told me what you were doing and you were not giving up, and it's obvious that you still haven't given up. It just makes me sad that you continue to have to fight these fights. I know at the time the Halton Catholic School Board had elected officials on there who were contributing to the hate. Today there's a by-election in British Columbia, and the Conservative candidate there in 2021 on debate over conversion therapy quoted the Bible to say that gay people were, quote, unclean. And my colleague Rob Oliphant countered that to say that he is not unclean. And it was, quite frankly, it was despicable. And she's running for re-election today, and very likely tomorrow could be a member of Parliament in the House of Commons again. We have a Conservative MP who said on a podcast recently that if he was given the opportunity, that he would vote against gay marriage. I wonder, Tyler, I'll start with you, but then the other Tyler, if you want to comment as well. How do comments from elected officials contribute to the hate that is targeting people, the 2S LGBTQI+ community?
I'll first mention that the rhetoric of being unclean is exactly what people said about people of color. Exact same thing. Completely the same.
Yeah.
Which is hard to hear. It's very hard to hear. The rhetoric from social conservatives and people like Jordan Peterson, I'll speak about from what I've heard from campers, is devastating. They are terrified. It's something that they can't wrap their minds around, that they hear every single day, also through social media, which pushes them into echo chambers that are filled with hate that we've mentioned a few times here. Yeah, the rhetoric is terrifying. And actually, I think this will connect to something that was asked earlier about where do they go? If not in schools, if there are no safe spaces in schools, where do they go? First of all, they shouldn't have to go anywhere, of course, but Camp 10 Oaks is one of those places. For example, where are we? In 2024,
If you can just wrap it around in 30 seconds,
yes.
please.
In 2024, 309 campers applied, although we were only able to accommodate 179. That's an increase from 2023, where 287 applied. This is an ongoing need that needs support.
Chair, the witness mentioned he had some articles. If there's anything you want to leave with the committee, Tyler, it will get distributed to all of us. Thank you.
Information, specifically this board meeting, as well as some stats about Camp 10 Oaks.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have to have a half minute to Ms. LaRouche.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm going to follow up with the Emergence Foundation. I only have 2.5 minutes, but I'd like to come back to something. And I'd like to thank my colleague, Anna, for having brought up the link with seniors, because it's one of the many programs, actually, that Emergence has run. For example, Aging Gayfully was one of their programs. And we need opportunities where you can act upstream. But there's an issue of funding, too. One requires funding for these programs. Laurent, you're very familiar with this project. Do you want to talk a little about the importance of the government being able to sustain programs like this? Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Laroche, for your question. You know, oftentimes one refers to youth when you're talking about LGBTQ+, and that's a good thing. However, one mustn't forget that there are seniors. And when you look at the demographics in Canada, there are more people 65 years old and older than 25% and younger. And if there's a percentage of the population that's LGBTQ+, they exist throughout the population, and they're often invisible. So we had this program called Aging Gayfully. However, it hasn't existed now in a few years for a lack of funding, and oftentimes the senior programs are underfunded on the part of the federal government, like this one. That is to say, raising awareness and providing education. And so there remains a significant amount of work to do, and there's a whole invisible part of the population. There are many seniors who are still in the closet. So, and there is still phobia amongst senior citizens. And I'm not just talking about seniors against seniors. There's also an inability on the part of centers that are involved with seniors to deal with phobia regarding LGBTQ+ members. And this is a generalized issue. There are very few resources available to make these places more inclusive. So it's important to remember that our seniors also need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you, Madam LaRouche. Next, we have Alia Guzan, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I just want to say, I mean, part of my directness today is because I'm hoping this study will allow us to all do better as elected officials in this country. I want to point to a blog that was written in the London School of Economics by a woman named Emily Sams Harris. And what they said was, in talking about far-right protesters occupied Canada, she's talking about the convoy, the capital city of Ottawa in February 2022 under the banner of Freedom Convoy, and the ways apathetic police responses encouraged anti-gender rhetoric. Originally claimed to be organized as a protest for COVID-19 vaccine mandates established by the federal provincial governments, the convoy quickly evolved. It quickly became clear that this anti-vaccine, anti-masking protest had absorbed anti-gender movement discourses and dog whistles under the banner of so-called, in quotes, freedom For more than 3 weeks, occupiers employed aggressive, threatening tactics such as confronting people on the streets whom they believed to be pro-mask, pro-vaccine, particularly women, Black communities, Indigenous communities, people of color, as well as the queer and trans communities. Hearing transphobic slurs was not uncommon. And I want to say that also happened with Every Child Matters, where the Orange Shirt Society pushed back against the convoy, asking them to stop. So, Lauren Prague, I want to go back to you. The rise of extremism, far-right extremism in the country. What can we do as elected officials to ensure that we are not contributing to far-right extremism? And what should we also do as elected officials to call out far-right extremists that are currently elected and serving in the Conservative Party of Canada?
Thanks very much for sharing that and for the question. I think, as I said before, it's a question of really just naming mis and disinformation. I think it's also about, offering empathy and understanding that as elected officials, you're representing everybody in your constituency, and there are gay, queer, trans, bi people in your constituency. And so, understanding that all of your constituents deserve the same rights. And so I think in terms of existing discriminatory positions and thoughts, we have to come back to facts. We have to come back to laws, the charter. These things matter, and I think they need to be held up. And so this is where, like I mentioned before, the use of the notwithstanding clause to kind of get around some of those things is a very dangerous precedent that we're seeing in many different instances, either be used or alluded to as a way of getting around that. So again, it's just having conversations based in fact, empathy, equity, and really aiming to represent all Canadians as we are supposed to, elected officials are supposed to, based on the charter. So that would be my quick answer to your question.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Dominic. You have 5 minutes.
Oui. Merci beaucoup, Madame. Oui, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank all our witnesses for coming today. Madam Chair, I'd just like to raise a point before continuing. The Conservative Party of Canada accepted to begin this study and to take it seriously, and that is violence, hate-motivated violence against the 2S LGBTQI plus community. And we're doing that with an open mind, a caring mind. And I think it's unfortunate today, and it's not the first time that we've heard this from the beginning of this study. I think it's very discouraging to hear misinformation coming from the other parties. It's very discouraging because the Conservative Party of Canada has the members of the Conservative Party voted against conversion therapy, and Ms. Landsman was appointed by Pierre Poilievre as well. So I just wanted to clear up that point. Now I'm going to ask my first question. I'm going to put it to Tyler Weisner. Mr. Weisner, if I understood you correctly, you said that recently, perhaps a month or two ago, you were the victim of a death threat. Did I understand you correctly?
Thank you for the question. Yes, you were. I received a death threat online, and this was absolutely not the first time. Likely won't be the last. About a month ago, I remember specifically one line said, "I want to beat you within an inch of your life." And this was someone I've never met. They knew nothing about me. It was good old-fashioned homophobia. Yes.
Clairement gratuit.
So gratuitous. Tyler, tell me then, what did you do after this happened? You're telling us about it today, and thank you for sharing that information. Did you go to the police? Did you go to any law enforcement authorities to report this?
Reported this incident to the organization that this incident took place, the social media organization, and I'm waiting on a response.
Bien. Est-ce que vous avez...
Thank you. Is it your intention to lay a complaint? Because I'm going to just draw a link with what Ms. Baker was saying from the Fondation Emergence. 91%, she said, of victims do not report what happens, do not lay complaints, and that is a significant number. Now, it's somewhat like victims of sexual assault who don't lay complaints. So I'd like to know if you intend on laying a complaint, because you didn't make this up. You received the death threat, you read it, and obviously it profoundly impacted you. So I want to know if it's your intention then to lay a complaint with the police.
Absolutely, that is my intent. Unfortunately, the message was sent from an anonymous profile that was deleted within an hour of sending the messages. I was quick enough to take screenshots and send them to the social media organization, but I'm waiting on them to figure out who said that, where that account came from, before getting the police involved. And it's also...
Bien sûr.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Bien sûr.
Thank you. I don't think I'm saying anything new when I say that the Conservative Party of Canada is a party that sides with victims and that wants to ensure that we have laws that protect, to the best of their ability, victims first. Ms. Baker, you provided us with two statistics that really struck me. The first was that 78% of Canadians say that they are allies of these communities. Perhaps you said that, or your colleague. And the other statistic was that 91% of members of the LGBTQ plus community who are victims do not report these crimes. Why do they not report them? I'm asking you the question. However, at the same time, I want to say that when we were looking at intimate partner violence and violence against women, it was noted that young women don't report this. They feel like it's not going to lead anywhere, nothing's going to happen. So could you tell me about the context in which these individuals do not report these hate crimes? Why don't they do that? 91% is a huge number. Yes. It's something that you'll see in other communities. The interpreter would like to point out that there's something wrong with the sound coming from the speaker.
Qui ont vécu la criminalisation ou la persécution policière. Donc c'est clair que ça...
The service is being interrupted because the sound is not clear.
J'enverrai les chiffres plus tard.
Mais écrivez-nous.
Please write us then. If you have any data, please write us.
Can you say a few words, Madam Baker?
Oui.
Yes, I can. Yes, so the main reason is that they didn't think that it would change anything. So please then speak for another 30 seconds. Well, there were three statistics. 74% of those who felt that nothing would change, 45% felt that they didn't trust the police, and 26% felt that they didn't think the police would believe them. So those are the statistics that we have from the group that collected the data. Thank you very much.
Lisa, Ms. Hepner, yes, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here with this very important testimony today. Kind of all over the place of where to start here. I think it's clear that Conservatives have no interest in asking questions about why we see such a rising hate against the 2S LGBTQI plus community. Tyler Weisner, I thought it was interesting, the questions to you about why you didn't go to police after an online threat. I wouldn't expect the police to be able to do much with an online threat like that. We are moving forward in this country with some online harms legislation. It's not perfect. There's more work to do. The Conservatives have put forward a similar bill that would make you have to sue the online media company in order to get any sort of, to have your post taken down or to get any sort of retribution. So all the onus is on them, but you'd have to sue, say, the social media company in order to get any retribution.
Point of order,
so what
that's
are your
not,
ideas
that's not true,
about,
just for the record. If you can table that to
that?
prove that, that's all I'm asking. That's not true.
No.
That's not what the legislation
I
is.
don't interrupt you with your untruths, Michelle, so you can wait till you have the floor to continue with
you have
your
a floor.
untruth. So how do you think we fight this? Because you're right, like it's not just online harms anymore. We're seeing manifestations of this on the street. People are being physically attacked. It's happening in real life now. It's not just online. So, I mean, any suggestions?
You mentioned it's not only happening online. I received a death threat in the streets of Toronto last week while I was walking home from work. How do we address this? I think the onus, or part of the onus, should be on these social media companies, that they need to be monitoring in some way, because these threats are immediate. They need to be addressed in a timely manner, or violence will occur. It's that simple. Now, how to regulate these social media companies is difficult because there are pros and cons. They do provide a great network to reach out to people like yourselves to find community where you otherwise wouldn't. But the threats of violence are real and very vast.
Tyler Boyce, do you have anything to add?
I think that we're really bringing this conversation to where it needs to be when we talk about online harms, and that is, as the other Tyler has mentioned, that these harms are happening in real life. I think one common theme today that I'm seeing is the responsibility of our elected officials to make sure that these conversations are happening in a responsible way that doesn't cause undue harm. I think what I would add is that I know that in a nonpartisan way across all parties, folks do understand the responsibility of what it means to represent Canadians. What I would add is a gentle reminder that all Canadians does not mean those that are politically convenient, but it means all communities, including our communities.
So when you hear from the leader of the opposition, female spaces should be exclusively for females, not biological males, what does that say to you? That was the leader of the Conservative Party.
It says to me that for the trans women who are simply trying to use the washroom, that they are at a heightened risk of becoming a statistic of an unnecessary and avoidable hate crime. It means to me that the ways in which folks are expressing themselves, whether intentionally or not, needs a lot of work done if we're going to live up to the promise of representing all Canadians.
Thank you. I have about 45 seconds left. I was hoping to get over to you, Lauren Prague, online. I was really moved by your opening statement. Particularly, you spoke about a student who'd been harassed by teachers, but also about parents radicalized to think schools are transing kids. I asked a teacher about this in our last session at this committee. Like, teachers themselves are being attacked for this misconception that they're causing students to think a certain way about their gender. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I know we don't have much time, but the truth is, I mean, gender is a social construct, and it's part of teachers' role to speak to that, as they do with any other social concept that they are sharing with students. I think that, again, there is a fear among school officials about parental backlash and what that does, right? There is, like, as many of my colleagues here today have said, there's a threat of this violence spilling out beyond just our communities as well. And so, I mean, the last thing I want to say right now is, I think we again need to go a little bit deeper and look at what is driving this division, right? The cost of living is up. This is about people not feeling like they have enough and looking for scapegoats all over the place. And right now we're talking about the 2S LGBTQ community, but there are other examples of this, throughout our society right now. And so I think these are the things that we need to address. We need to make sure that everybody has what they need in order to function and don't need to turn on each other in order to feel like they have power and access and services that speak to them.
Thank you, Ms. Ragg. And now we go to Ms. Ferrari. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. It's obviously heated politically in the world right now, and we appreciate your time. I want to come back to Mr. Weisner, if I can. Death threats are certainly not acceptable at anyone's expense. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of, and we've heard a lot about, is in the 2S LGBTQIA plus community is homelessness, access to resources, housing. In a lot of the agencies that you're helping with, and again, I know there's a diverse group of people here that are working with different folks. How important is the housing? What we're seeing, I see it in my community of Peterborough. We have a youth emergency shelter, and there's a high percentage of kids who are identifying and they don't have access to affordable housing. How important do you think the economy comes to play in sort of how people do? Because we've seen in this, we've actually heard from the Liberals say this too, when the economy falls, people look for a scapegoat. They're stressed, they're not regulated, they're stressed out of their minds, and they project and they hurt other people because they're in survival mode. Mr. Weisner, how important do you think a healthy economy is to restoring the ability to be able to even learn and be educated and be in that headspace?
Thank you for the question. Incredibly important. Affordable housing, affordable groceries, affordable living is incredibly important. Although it's unfortunate that we have to have this discussion and not talk about those things. We have to have this discussion before we can move on. We have to address these issues, otherwise it won't go away. Where we should be talking about the housing crisis, the groceries crisis, the job crisis. These are things that affect people across Canada no matter what.
I think the mental state of folks when it's like an intersection, right? Like, so not only do you not think you're ever going to be able to afford a home or have a safe home or a safe street, and now you're also dealing with an intersection of other issues or a lack of education, or like, my colleague Anna has said, of trying to reach different people and have those discussions like you've said, Mr. Boyce. And so I guess, we have a fall economic statement that's supposed to be delivered today. What do you want to see in that fall economic statement in terms of how the economy should be functioning for people to have access to the basics when we look at food and housing? I'll go back to you, Mr. Weisner.
I would say because of my position of justice, I shouldn't comment on that. But I will say that hate is not only received by or perpetuated by those in low socioeconomic statuses. I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, an incredibly wealthy city, where I received incredible hate from wealthy social conservatives. And my colleagues at work have received the same from a very different point of view.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this multiple times through other witnesses, right? It's that connection piece that has to happen for people to see people, right? And that's where that discussion and education opens up, to your point, Mr. Boyce, of going in with seniors' homes, and to my colleague, Ms. Roberts' point. When we see the person, right, it dissolves a lot of that tension or anger. But I will hammer on this point, because when people can't afford to live, they're not even in a position to listen or hear or be regulated. And I'm just getting a message from my community right now. We have the highest rate of food insecurity for children in history. In history. So now if you're a child and you're different, either you learn different, your gender is different, your sexuality is different, and your parents can't afford to live, they're fighting, they're stressed out, the incidence or risk of domestic violence is going to go up. The desperation of that happens when you can't afford to feed your family bleeds into all facets. And, you know, there's been a 251% increase in hate crimes in this country since Justin Trudeau took office. And that's not a coincidence, because it's also seen the lowest GDP per growth. And so I would love to see people be able to have this education and understanding and be open to these things. But we have to ensure that people can eat and house themselves. I want to go to Miss Baker. Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you can answer just in 30 seconds, please.
I was just going to ask Miss Baker about access to housing for folks and resources when they're in that housing to have peer support.
Very quickly, oui, clairement une surreprésentation des personnes LGBT.
Clearly, there's an overrepresentation amongst the homeless population of LGBTQ plus people. And the other issue is shelters. The shelters aren't necessarily equipped when it comes to training with respect to an ability to treat respectfully those people who come, who are members of that community as well, in particular trans women.
Emanuela, you have five.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by thanking all of the witnesses who all have been great today. Thank you so much for your testimony. I'm hearing some things that I'm really not okay with, and I've heard throughout this meeting and actually through other meetings within this study that I haven't been okay with, because it kind of just reinforces the idea of using scapegoats when things are not going well. You know, I've heard it said today that, you know, newer immigrants, new populations might be the cause for the rise in hate. And I've heard it at a previous meeting, the same thing, so by another member. And I just want to say that that is not okay. And in my experience, people who used to have a mentality of live and let live are actually the ones who have changed their mentality over the last few years. It's not necessarily new people to Canada. It's Canadians who have been here for a long time and who have access to disinformation, misinformation online, and to what they're being shown. And honestly, I think that unfortunately the Conservative Party does use scapegoats, does use certain minority communities, certain communities against each other, and tries to use this as a reason for increased hate. I don't think that's the case, and I think it's very dangerous to go down that path.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
I would like to continue. Thank you very much. So my question here is, what, in your opinion, can be done or said to people who did have this mentality of openness before, live and let live, who have been, kind of influenced by the change in rhetoric that they're hearing online? What are some of the messages you would want people to hear today? Anyone can answer, but yeah, Mr. Boyce.
Sure. I really appreciate the thoughtful question and for pointing out the harmful consequences of scapegoating communities. I think that what can be done in order for us to avoid the low-hanging fruit of scapegoating communities and rather to create the enduring relationships we're going to need to take us into the next decade and definitely into this next electoral season that we're going into are those conversations that are going to be led by 2S LGBTQI+ organizations. The easiest way to bring folks back to an understanding, and I'm actually going to pull from your previous question, is the simple fact that we need to have equal opportunity across all sectors in Canada. Whether it's in housing, whether it's in employment, whether it's in healthcare, if Canadians simply because of their gender identity or sexual orientation or whatever other factor cannot access those same resources, then we're never going to get to where we need to be. I think that immigrant communities understand this maybe better than most Canadians. Most immigrant communities came here for the chance to access all of the amazing resources and become members of parliament, elected officials, leaders in AI and innovation. And we only see that because we were able to access education and resources. When we're talking about scapegoating communities for folks that might have forgotten their humble origins in this country, or folks that are scapegoating whole communities, I think we have to understand the tremendous opportunity we have to create connections in this country. And that doesn't start by scapegoating. It starts by reaching out to these communities in conversations like this, led by people like myself and the hundreds of queer and trans organizations you represent at the Enchanté Network.
Thank you so much. Actually, you spoke to something that had been mentioned previously about housing. I know a trans woman who was refused to be allowed to rent housing, even though she had the funds to be able to pay for the housing. She was refused at least 10 times before she finally found housing that she could live in. So these barriers existed before people weren't able to afford housing. And it's like you said, this intersectional lens needs to be applied because not everyone has equal access regardless of their economic status.
What I'll add is that we'll be submitting a brief with precise statistics of how queer and trans communities are doing across sectors, and also with an intersectional analysis on data, particularly for Black, queer, and trans folks who we know are at a heightened inequitable access in terms of these public services.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think Mr. Weisner wanted to chime in as well.
Yeah, just a quick, to finish up my comment earlier, that the cost of living crisis is very real. I believe all political parties agree on that. But I do want to hammer down this point that low socioeconomic status does not cause gender dysphoria. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Lauren, you spoke to us earlier about your organization, which helps 3,000 youth a year. And I'm wondering if you've noticed recently this increase. Have more and more people been reaching out? And what would you say is the biggest cause? You also spoke a little bit about the fact that more people are having a harder time making and keeping friends since the pandemic. What do you think is contributing to that?
Please wrap up in 30 seconds. Just sorry? In 30 seconds, if you can answer quickly.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you so much for the question. I would just say, isolation is largely leading to that, and that the roots of that are complex, right? And so I think the whittling down of community spaces is a really big part of that. And so I think as Tyler Boyce was talking about connecting with people outside of your own demographic, like there are a lot of examples of this, that those spaces, those opportunities are fewer and fewer for people. And so especially for youth who may have gone to school virtually for the majority of their high school experience, et cetera, it's becoming more and more difficult. Social services don't have funding, so there's less opportunity for things like volunteering or summer jobs and things like that. And so it's harder for them to get those kinds of connections and make real relationships, I would say.
Thank you, Ms. Bragg. Next, we have a 2.5 minute for Madame Lorish. You have to.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to apologize to the witnesses and say that I'm quite ashamed of the members of this committee. Obviously, we haven't learned this summer's lessons. Now we're politicizing this issue after politicizing violence against women. I just want to remind everyone we invited these witnesses, and we shouldn't be politicizing the issue. Now, that being said, thank you very much, Lauren Bragg. Thank you to both Tylers for your testimony. It's an amazing contribution to this study. And now I'm going to ask questions of the Fondation Emergence. Laurent, you spoke about the Journal Métro. Olivia, I know there have also been issues of disinformation and misinformation elsewhere. So there may be ethical rules that apply to traditional media, but sometimes you get the impression that it's the far west online and that this contributes to this polarization. So I'd like to hear you speak to us about how we may deal with hate online as opposed to hate within traditional media. Well, I think there are issues that are related to digital literacy, the importance of education. I mean, I provide corporate coaching to businesses, so white-collar people actually, who have questions that are similar to questions you hear elsewhere. You know, people have access to a huge amount of information, and it's often hard to screen out some of that information. You know, when people read, they don't necessarily make the difference between someone's report and an article. And there's also the issue of accountability within media. You know, sources should be cited. It should be clearer and transparent when you're providing information online. And tools are also required to double-check information. You know, sometimes I'd say to people they should carry out a test. So it is possible to use decrypting tools. And there's a program on Radio-Canada called Les Décrypteurs, which is educational in that respect. So some of these things, though, aren't available. Sometimes they don't contain enough information, but there has to be a source that people can trust and that allows them to discriminate between facts and non-facts and figure out what the reality actually is. So I think that's part of a solution to counter disinformation. Thank you, Ms. Baker.
Jan, half minute.
Thank you so much, Madame Sidhu. And I want to be really clear. This is a nonpartisan issue. Human rights are a nonpartisan issue. And all committee members did support the study. I want to be really clear about it. But I also want to be really clear that what we do as elected officials and the messages we speak, as has been cautioned by the witnesses today, can either harm or help people. I take my role as a member of Parliament very seriously, and I worry about how the halls of power are being used right now in a way that can harm people. In saying that, I wanted to ask you, Tyler Boyce, you've spoken a lot about education. I was a teacher. I feel so sad about what's happening in schools because I was a teacher and I was actually a sex ed teacher at the beginning of my career. Why is education important? And do you think that members of Parliament should have to go through mandatory training when they are elected to understand our roles, our legal obligations to uphold the Charter and which includes the whole Constitution upon being elected? Because it seems that we kind of pick and choose when to uphold it and when not to, depending on the issue.
I really appreciate the question. Of course, I'm a huge proponent of providing folks with the tools that they might need in order to do their jobs in the best way possible. In this case, I think that it's very clear that that also includes training on language to use to ensure that folks are not unintentionally causing harm. I would also add that for the first part of your question on education, my mom was also an educator. And I think that when we talk about education, we have to remember, and I want to bring this into the community, look at the diversity of witnesses who have been called to provide testimony. We didn't all just fall from the sky. We all come from our own individual communities. And so I want to present this committee with the fact that there is a tremendous opportunity for us to share the lessons learned that we've already had to make in our individual communities, religious, racial, ethnic, and otherwise, that have built bridges. That's why when we talk about education, and when I talk about it, I'm such a huge proponent of the fact that people can change their minds, that people can see things in a different way, because I know I've done it, and I know that all of my colleagues who are here today have done it in their own communities. Allow us to bring those lessons learned to those in the House of Commons as well.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce. Next, we have Ms. Roberts. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, I want to state for the record that I'm really disappointed in the other parties who want to politicize this, and especially to my colleague across the way when I mentioned about a personal client of mine who shared her very deep story with me. It was meant because of her background and her religious beliefs. That's why I brought it to the forefront. That's why I was talking about education, because we need to make sure that in Canada, everyone is acceptable. And that was my point. So I'm very, very disappointed. However, let's talk about online harms. Tyler, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with someone that threatened you. I mean, that's not acceptable. So I was interested to hear from you about the operations. Like Bill C-412 wants to be able to ensure that we don't have this hatred online. And what the Liberals are trying to do is stop it because they want to create another department. We don't need $200 million going towards another department. In my view, I think we need that money going towards what you've stated today about education and helping people understand that it doesn't matter who you love and it doesn't matter who you want to love. That's your personal choice. That's the freedom that Canada offers. And I'm tired of this committee pointing the finger at our Conservative leader who is a believer. We have a deputy leader who is gay and proud of it, and we're proud of her. So I'm not sure where this is going with the Liberals, because when you point fingers, 4 more point back at you. And I want to let you know that I'm sorry for your hatred online. That's not acceptable. I have family members that I love dearly that I would trust from here to the ends of the world that are gay, and I'm proud of them. So why can't we make sure that this online hatred, introducing Bill 412 to stop it, to make them accountable, so that individuals that choose to love who they choose to love are allowed to do that without hate? Mr. Weisner, I'd like you to respond.
Yeah, so I was just waiting for the light.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, and I do feel your empathy, so thank you. Again, because of my position at the Department of Justice, I will not comment on federal policies, but I'd be more than happy to continue talking about the exclusion, bullying, hate, or violence that my campers have experienced, that they've told me about. That's really the experience that I want to bring, that I want to relay, is that the rise in anti-trans, anti-LGBT, and sexist rhetoric has been devastating queer youth across North America. We have campers from the States, we have campers from the territories. Thank you.
So I would say that the best way to stop this hatred, and I agree with the educational part, absolutely, 100%. We need to make sure that people understand you can choose to love whoever you wish. We're not here to judge that. No one should be. But don't you feel that if we can stop this rhetoric online, this hatred online, that would help with the educational process?
I would say hateful rhetoric online definitely limits the value, not the value, the reach of education, I'll say. But again, I'm not an expert in social media regulations, and because of my position at the Department of Justice, I can't.
And Mr. Boyce, do you not agree that we need to stop this hatred online? Like, I get sick when I see it. I really do. I think there should be some consequences to that.
I want to commend all folks who are part of this committee for agreeing to go through with this study and for unanimously accepting it to go forward. I think everybody around the table, everybody in this room can agree that something needs to be done to ensure that online safety is a reality, especially for our trans youth who are right now experiencing a very hard time. I think the debate in terms of whose approach to get there is something that should happen in the House of Commons. But on this committee, I think that we can share, or I can share, that those conversations need to happen in collaboration with queer and trans organizations who are working on the front lines every day. We have the multitude of stories and realities of folks who are experiencing online hate. We have the data in the stories about how that hate is translated into real life instances of unsafety for our community. And I hope that that expertise can complement this ongoing discussion about which pathway is going to get us there.
So I hope that we will look at Bill C-412 so that we can make sure that people that do project that hatred online, that we can stop them, because it has to stop.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Next, we have Ms. Demoff. We have her for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Chair, and I'm so happy to get another opportunity to ask our incredible witnesses questions. Just for the records, the legislation that the Conservatives mentioned is a private member's bill that has no hope of ever seeing the light of day. So it also puts the onus on a victim to come forward and get digital social media companies to respond. And Tyler, if I know my experience with reaching out to them results in nothing. And Twitter now, our Sergeant at Arms has said you can't even reach out to them anymore. But what I want to focus on, and if my colleagues haven't read it yet, it's a report from the Office of the Federal Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime that came out last week. It's called Strengthening Access to Justice for Victims of Hate Crime in Canada. It's an outstanding report. I actually have asked him to submit it to the committee for evidence. And so I just want to read you some of the stats. And Tyler, you mentioned one particular death threat. I know that's not the only one that you've encountered, right? 72% of police officers said their police service did not have a dedicated hate crime unit. And of those that did, 44% only had one officer. 44% of victim services had fewer than 5 paid staff. 73% of victim services cited limited resources as a significant barrier to providing adequate support. 77% of police officers and 82% of victim services workers believed that the proposed standalone hate crime offense in Bill C-63 would be helpful or very helpful. They also say in this that throughout the years, discriminatory laws have marginalized 2S LGBTQIA+ people, and recent data suggests they are more likely to suffer physical harm from hate crimes than any other targeted group. And he's made 13 outstanding recommendations, which I hope colleagues will take the time to read. I'm just wondering, again, I'll start with the Tylers in the room, and then if we have time, go online. Have you gone into police to report hate crimes, and what has been your experience if you have? Tyler, Boyce, I'll start with you.
Sure. I personally, after experiencing a hate crime with my partner when we were out for a walk in our neighborhood, we did report the hate crime, and it really wasn't a very good experience. There was a lot of questions about what actually happened, almost as if they didn't believe us. And then in terms of support, the call began, and when the call hung up, nothing ever came from it. And maybe it's because they're understaffed. Maybe it's because they don't have the information. But this really spurred us at the Enchanté Network to understand this wasn't an individual experience, but one that was happening to thousands of Canadians across the country. So what we did is we went out and we asked folks, why are you not reporting to the police when you have a hate crime? And we unlocked a can of worms about the deep relationship or lack thereof between police services and queer and trans communities. There's a lot of trust that needs to be rebuilt there so that queer and trans folks feel safe going to report a hate crime, whether on the phone or in person. To put it in context, imagine being a trans person walking into a police station to report that you have experienced a hate crime. Do we believe that that person is going to be met with an environment that allows her to tell her authentic story about something traumatic that happened to her? I think that in the women's rights movement, folks understand this, what it means to come forward and tell your story and all the barriers that are included in that process, and there are lessons learned there. But first, we do need to build up police services to be able to respond, but we also need to understand how to put community in the position where they feel comfortable reporting these hate crimes in the first place.
Yeah, one of his recommendations is actually to invest in training for police and victim services, which speaks to your point. I just read there was a horrific crime that happened in Hamilton of a trans woman who was beaten, lost her teeth, and through the, victim services, a GoFundMe campaign, and donations, she's been able to have her teeth restored, but it was tens of thousands of dollars that were required because of the beating that she took. In 15 seconds left, Tyler, did you want to add anything about that?
Very quickly, yeah. I myself have not gone to the police about a hate crime, although I have heard stories from my campers who have had to. And I have almost had to call the police on their behalf at camp, although because of age regulations, I did not.
Can you send us some more information about the camp?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our panel today. And on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank every and each witnesses. Thank you very much. And seeing no questions, with that, meeting adjourned.